Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we unpack complex topics and really try to extract the most surprising insights. Today, we're not just dipping our toes in. We're taking a full plunge into a world that fundamentally challenges, well, just about everything we think we know about sanity, justice, and the sheer power of narrative itself. We're diving into a really unique stack of sources. They give us this extraordinary first-person account from someone we'll refer to as the buyer from World Succession Deed 1400.
Oh, we're just the buyer.
Or simply the buyer. His experiences, as he details them in these texts, they paint a stark, often chilling picture of life inside what he calls a penal psychiatry institution.
Or sometimes Black Site Berlin. That's his term.
Right, Black Site Berlin. His account raises some really profound questions, about how mental illness is diagnosed, how it's allegedly weaponized as a tool, and what forces he claims are truly at play behind the scenes.
Indeed. And this deep dive, it's unique because we're looking at a deeply personal, highly critical perspective on a system that's usually presented, well, quite differently.
Very differently.
The buyer sources, they're much more than just an autobiography. I mean, they are a forceful indictment of what he actually describes as conspiracy facts.
Conspiracy facts, not theories. That's important.
Exactly. Claims of covert state actions, the meticulous manipulation of public perception. So our mission today is really to explore the specific occurrences he details within this institution, to understand his very detailed critiques of psychological practices, and to try to grasp the broader implications of his claims about this alleged international deep state he believes is pulling the strings.
Okay, let's do that. Let's unpack this and hear directly from the buyer's perspective. We need to treat his experiences and assertions as the factual content he's provided for our discussion today. We're stepping into his world, trying to understand his narrative as he lays it out.
Right. Let's get into it.
So straight away, the buyer sets this really confrontational tone. He kicks things off by critiquing what he sees as a stark double standard in how the media reports on the use of penal psychiatry.
He goes right for the media.
He does. He points out that, German media frequently condemns Russia for its merciless treatment of citizens, describing them as cannon fodder, silencing critics, and, importantly for this discussion, using penal psychiatry to turn them into, his words, walking zombies through medication.
Yeah, those critiques often highlight Russia's contempt for international order, constant violation of human rights, that kind of language.
Exactly. But then the buyer asserts that this very same media, which he labels the German lying press, or Lügenpresse,
A very loaded term.
extremely loaded, he says they remain completely silent when exactly the same thing happens in Germany or allied states. So for the average Western citizen, these occurrences are, in his view, effectively non-existent. Why? Because they just aren't reported.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Pretty much. He vividly describes Western citizens as living in this kind of morally superior wonderland. He calls it a genuine delusion induced by the lying press, where people believe they inhabit a proper rule of law state where everything is above board.
And he dismisses that with contempt.
Oh, absolutely. With a literal ha-ha in the text. It's pure contempt for what he sees as this state-sponsored illusion.
What's really insightful there, though, is how he seems to expose a mechanism where the very act of dissent, of questioning the system, can be reframed and weaponized against you.
How so?
Well, he argues this narrative effectively transforms victims, people like him, he'd say, into perpetrators in the public eye. So when doubts about the system's legitimacy crop up, they get dismissed, right, as just exceptions or maybe isolated cases.
Right. Oh, that's just a one-off.
Exactly. While the overall system is still proclaimed to function, at least that's the propaganda line according to him, and that distinction between the perceived functionality and the alleged hidden reality is absolutely crucial to his whole argument.
So it's not just bad reporting, it's active narrative management.
That's what he's claiming. He gives specifics, too, mentioning smear campaigns directed against him personally. In his view, these showcase democracies, as he calls them, they're masters of hypocrisy. They use the same dirty methods as the worst oppressive regimes, but, and this is key, they do it covertly.
Undercover.
Precisely. And this secrecy, he claims, is protected by a propagandistic lying press. A press that doesn't just fail to support the victims, but actually helps portray them in public as perpetrators who, basically deserve what they get. He sees this as an incredibly insidious form of control, engineering public perception to dehumanize and isolate anyone the state wants to silence.
So it's clear then. He views this institution, penal psychiatry, not as a medical facility for healing,
Not at all.
but as a deliberate, almost sinister instrument for state control. He calls it Black Site Berlin.
That specific term, yeah.
And he explicitly states, psychology and psychiatry is the extended arm of the Secret Service, which, in turn, implements the hidden will of state leaders to eliminate unwanted opponents.
And it's not just any detention center in his account.
Yeah.
This Black Site Berlin. He describes it as a covert secret prison.
Secret, yeah.
Where the staff, interestingly, he claims they act alternately on behalf of the German, American, and Russian states.
Wow.
All under the umbrella, the guise of this international deep state. He really believes it's a hidden facility designed to bypass normal legal processes and international checks.
And this elimination, how does he say that happens?
Through forced medication primarily.
Yeah.
Mentally checkmating individuals is his phrase. And the indefinite nature of this stays in penal psychiatry. The Maßregelvoll, that means, quote, any threats are eliminated forever.
No end date.
No clear end date, which is crucial. He draws these direct parallels to what he calls the real penal psychiatry of the communist USSR, East Germany, the DDR, and current Putin Russia, where, if you protest, you're just instantly labeled crazy. And he notes that in Russia, this practice has apparently seen a resurgence in 2024. Especially for opponents of Putin and the war in Ukraine. It allows them to be locked up without formal political charges.
So it's a way to bypass the political label.
Exactly. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture he's painting, the buyer alleges that Germany has learned from the history of the DDR and Nazi Germany, that it's refined its methods to save face.
Refine them? How?
Well, with considerable extra effort, time, preparation, and cost, he says. But for him, the result is what matters. That's all that counts. He suggests that countries like Germany, with significant resources, they can afford to operate these covert systems, maintain that democratic facade while actually mimicking authoritarian tactics behind closed doors.
So the claim is basically a sophisticated, hidden system.
Yes. Enabling the state to act without ever openly declaring political charges, mimicking those authoritarian regimes, but keeping up the image of a rule of law state. And he describes the process chillingly. Enemies being eliminated through a chemical brain knockout, turned into walking dead with a pulse. A fate he considers far worse than a death sentence because victims are just condemned to vegetate.
And central to this whole alleged covert operation, he says, is the media's role in shaping how the public sees it all.
Absolutely critical.
He highlights this by citing a specific article, Morgen Post Berlin, December 4th, 2012. The headline was, "It began with a knife attack in the district office. In court, mother and son are mentally ill."
Right before the court decision, even.
Exactly. He labels this typical lying press, arguing it preemptively labeled them as crazy before any judgment. Why? Because, as he puts it so starkly, crazy people have no supporters.
That's a brutal assessment.
It is. He contrasts the situation with someone like Nelson Mandela. Mandela exercised violence, the buyer notes, but still had public support, protests on his behalf. But these German scumbags, as he calls them, they know how to discredit someone through the lying press to make absolutely sure there are certainly no supporters. For him, this isn't just biased reporting. It's an active, strategic campaign of public discrediting.
And instead of support, he claims the public is actually incited.
Incited, yes. Incited to hunt the victim, declaring them outlawed. He uses the German word vogelfrei. And the public, he claims, applauds their disenfranchisement and complete expropriation, saying things like, "That's right, isn't this a great rule of law state?" And then he issues this stark warning directly to you, the listener. He emphasizes that people fail to realize, if it happens to him, it can happen to them at any time. Nobody is safe. He blames this on permanent brainwashing by the fake news media landscape, which leaves, in his view, zero chance for honest information. His message is blunt. If people are fed only misinformation, only shit can emerge, leading to this deeply corrupted public understanding.
So that leads into his experience in court, which sounds like anything but a standard legal proceeding in his telling.
Oh, completely. He describes it as a show process, explicitly designed, he says, to present him and his mother as dangerous, as deranged. He paints this vivid picture being paraded behind bulletproof glass like terrorists or serious criminals. A staging meant to imply extreme public danger. He describes his glass box as being only as small as a cramped phone booth, just emphasizing the dehumanizing spectacle.
And the media reporting on that.
He details specific quotes the Morgen Post used, like, he says he is the king of Kreuzberg. Now, the buyer clarifies that sounds completely nonsensical without context, especially to a Berliner who'd think of Berlin. But his claim originated in Zweibrücken, he says, and had specific unmentioned legal implications within his worldview.
So the context is stripped away.
Completely. Similarly, his mother was quoted, "My son is the highest judge in this city and therefore also supreme jurisdiction." Again, presented completely without explanation, making them sound completely insane. It effectively discredits them, even though, as the buyer states, the newspaper is technically reporting truth as he sees it, but in a way that guarantees no one believes it.
It's a clever manipulation, if his account is accurate. What about this CD status?
Right, their diplomatic status.
Oh.
He claims the press mentioned it, but because the portrayal was so deliberately strange, the public wouldn't buy it. And then he adds, very provocatively, Germany is known for routinely violating international law, and especially its own national law.
That really raises the question about selective information, doesn't it? The power of leaving out context. His account implies that by reporting literal statements, but without the framework of his legal proceedings or diplomatic status, which are foundational for him, the media creates this incredibly biased narrative, turning his truth into something unbelievable.
He also clarifies that statement about demanding the death penalty for officials. That got reported widely.
Yeah, I remember that.
He stresses he didn't just demand it from the court they were in. He claims he actually used the courtroom to open my own proceedings against the officials and judges. And then, acting as a judge himself, he sentenced all involved to death.
So he sees it as his own legal action within their courtroom.
Precisely. He states this was a legally enforceable judgment with an expired appeal period which one day must be executed. For him, this is a completely different legal act, a self-initiated judicial process, not just a demand made to the existing court. It highlights this profound gap between his interpretation and the official story.
Okay, so that brings us to this incident in a clinic. There were reports of violence. How does the buyer explain that?
He explains it through this lens of extreme duress. Survival, basically. The Tagesspiegel in Berlin, also on December 4th, 2012, reported, mother and son admitted attacks in a clinic. A 61-year-old mother, 36-year-old son admitting attacks on a doctor and a nurse. This was in a trial for attempted manslaughter, bodily harm, attempted extortion.
And the background?
The article stated the mother was admitted after threatening district office staff with a knife for money. The son, the buyer, later injured a doctor with a knife trying to free his mother, who then allegedly scratched a nurse. The prosecution, the paper said, assumed both were mentally ill.
How does the buyer respond to that report?
Unequivocally, he says it's completely ripped out of context to make them look crazy and dangerous. He explains the desperate situation that led to his mother demanding money. He asserts, Germany had completely plundered us. We had received no money for ages, were homeless, and actually should have gone human hunting for food.
Yeah, quite a statement.
It is. He firmly states, that was Germany's fault. What should we have done? The alternative was starve. And he explains his rationale for targeting the office, not random citizens. Attacking normal citizens was simply out of the question for me, he says, because Germany would have used that to demonize them even more. He frames it purely as a matter of life or death. A direct, desperate act driven by being denied basic survival needs.
Does he dispute any details?
Yes, specifically his mother scratching a nurse. He claims she was only crying next to me and said, "Oh God, Rick," when he stabbed the doctor. And while he did admit to his actions in court, he claims everything he said about international law, his context, his justification was discreetly swept under the rug. The press, he believes, only picks out what is suitable for locking us up and fits the propaganda.
So, again, this recurring theme. Actions the state sees as criminal, driven by mental illness.
He presents them as acts of survival, resistance against a hostile state, a direct result, he argues, of the propaganda of the lying press and the injustice of that show trial.
And the culmination of all this, for him, is penal psychiatry itself, this black site Berlin.
Exactly. He sees it as perfectly suited to permanently incapacitate opponents of all kinds and make them disappear before everyone's eyes. This involves being locked away forever and turned into walking dead by the administration of psychopharmaceuticals.
The chemical brain knockout.
That exact phrase. He claims victims are mentally dead but still have a pulse, which, he says, lets Germany claim, look, we no longer have the death penalty. But he finds this fate worse than death. Victims sentenced to vegetate, with only a last mental spark of their original self remaining, cruelly aware of their living dead state.
And the key difference from regular prison.
The indefinite detention. Unlike prison, with its clear rules, fixed release dates, penal psychiatry, this special clinic for mentally ill offenders allows for arbitrarily long stays. This, in his words, is how competition can be gotten rid of when prison alone wouldn't break them. It's a more insidious, permanent form of control.
He brings in historical context, too, doesn't he?
Yes, very powerfully. He talks about penal psychiatry in the USSR 1960s and 70s, where he says 11,000 to 15,000 people were subjected to it. Immigrants, dissidents, opposition members, religious and national movement figures, critics of all kinds. He mentions the poet Joseph Brodsky's 3-week stay, calling it the worst time of his entire life.
And his personal connection.
He states, with raw conviction, I can only confirm that because I too experienced the full range of modern torturous psychiatry with permanent 5-point fixation, chemical fixation injection, and years of forced medication. That personal testimony, it just underscores his belief that these aren't just historical parallels, they reflect his own lived reality.
And he contrasts that with Russia, where he says these abuses have been acknowledged.
Yes, he says victims there have been compensated since 1992. But, he asserts, the torture methods of the BRD Federal Republic of Germany are not yet recognized and largely happen in secret. He calls penal psychiatry the stronghold of evil and torture, ruled by an oppressive regime of almighty, malicious, loyal psychologists who fully exploit their omnipotence over powerless victims. His conclusion is stark. Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
It really forces you to ask that question. What happens when someone's personal reality, their interpretation of events, is just so fundamentally, irrevocably at odds with the official story, with the institutional power? His account is this visceral first-hand depiction of what he truly perceives as a system designed purely for dehumanization and permanent elimination.
And from there, the buyer really takes aim at the foundations of psychology and psychiatry itself, especially the diagnostic methods.
Yeah, this is where his critique gets really fundamental.
He argues that trying to prove you're mentally healthy inside penal psychiatry is completely pointless, because any attempt is immediately seen as just another manifestation of mental illness.
A sign of lack of insight into illness.
Exactly, which then justifies more treatment. Intensified, forced treatment with psychopharmaceuticals, which he calls that chemical atomic bomb for a healthy brain.
He explains the process.
Yeah.
Right? The Gutachten.
Yes, the psychological report from a court-appointed expert. That report, he says, is what determines if you're deemed mentally ill, if you get hit with Section 63, the Unterbringungsmacht, Section 63, STGB, which means permanent placement in an institution for mentally ill offenders. And the chilling part can mean lifelong
detention based on that report.
Based on that report, he mentions the diagnostic manuals, the ICD from the WHO, the DSM. He calls them the Bibles of psychologists, containing all the diagnoses that lead to these huge, life-altering decisions.
And his main criticism of these manuals
is that it's all still a running process. It's not set in stone. New editions keep coming out, constantly redefining, adding, even removing entire psychological illnesses. He points out how ICD-9 is massively different from ICD-10, how ICD and DSM often compete and even contradict each other.
So the ground is constantly shifting.
Exactly. He claims new career-hungry psychologists are always redefining everything, that completely new psychological ailments are just freely invented. He gives examples like sick building syndrome and burnout. He doesn't see these as real conditions.
What does he see them as?
Pleasant illness alternatives, he calls them. For people who absolutely need a diagnosis to prove their alleged mental disability, maybe someone seeking early retirement out of laziness, he suggests. It's a very cynical view.
And he criticizes the psychologist's attitude, too.
Oh, strongly. He quotes what he sees as their arrogant assertion. Healthy people are those who do not know that they are sick. He calls this audacious and megalomaniacal, basically claiming that anyone considered psychologically healthy just hasn't been examined closely enough yet.
Which really raises the question about the motivations behind all this diagnostic change.
And the buyer is explicit about that. The purpose of the constantly new disease definitions is obvious, he states, namely to generate profit. He sees it as a systemic expansion driven by money.
He uses the term disease-mongering.
Yes, coined by Lynn Payer back in '92. How the pharmaceutical industry, doctors' associations, psychotherapists, and self-help groups, as well as lawyers, often have a self-serving interest in the definition of new diseases.
A whole ecosystem profiting from defining more illness.
That's his claim. And he issues this strong warning. Don't accept these idiotic diagnoses, and especially don't accept the prescribed meds. He likens psychopharmaceuticals to snake oil. The only guaranteed effect, he says, are the sometimes drastic side effects they are guaranteed. Any actual healing, he puts a big question mark behind that. The harm is certain, the benefit questionable, in his view.
He connects it to the economy, too.
Yeah, points to the huge impact. 132 million days of work incapacity due to psychological stress in Germany in 2022. He claims some psychologists just prescribe antidepressants for temporary states of exhaustion so employees can continue to function, keep working, rather than dealing with the root causes.
A sticking plaster, not a cure.
Pretty much. He firmly believes most psych meds are as ineffective as homeopathic globuli, just with massive side effects. Both are absolutely ineffective, he states flatly. He asserts science simply has no means yet to cure mental illnesses. A stark claim he believes is proven by the unpredictable behavior of patients he saw on the black site, even those heavily medicated.
Okay, so beyond the diagnostic categories themselves being flawed, he also attacks the testing methods.
Fundamentally unsound, he argues, prone to manipulation. He critiques the constantly changing bases, definitions, and criteria for diagnosis, and also the tests themselves, the test criteria. He notes different psychologists use different tests, which can lead to completely different diagnoses, even with the same answers, highlighting the subjectivity.
So the diagnosis depends heavily on the individual psychologist.
Very strongly dependent, he says, influenced by their choice of test, which manual they use, and which year's version, whether their knowledge is outdated or up to date. And what he finds most insane is that psychologists assume they're immune to manipulation and lies during therapy and testing.
They think patients are always truthful.
That's what he implies they think, he asserts. Only if patients do not trick can a diagnosis be made according to the diagnostic criteria. If the patient lies, the whole process is meaningless.
And does he think patients lie?
He makes this really provocative claim. Full 100% of the patients he spoke to in penal psychiatry stated they had their own plan to manipulate the test.
100%.
That's what he claims. Their motives varied, he says. Getting rid of a diagnosis, getting a better one, being declared accountable, achieving remission, or being seen as cured. It raises this huge question about trust, doesn't it? In a diagnostic process that he believes is just systematically undermined by patients' survival strategies, especially somewhere high stakes like penal psychiatry.
Did he ever challenge a psychologist on this?
Yes, he recounts asking a therapist assessor on the ward, "Do you really imagine that any patient tells the truth in such a test?" And the response, he says, was this incredulous: "Lies. In a test. That's not possible. Every psychologist sees through every little lie immediately." The buyer says he just couldn't help but laugh out loud at what he saw as staggering naivete.
So his view is that release depends on successful manipulation.
He claims all patients who are released have lied their way out. There's no other way. Patients, he elaborates, they weigh exactly what to say, what to better conceal, what to present differently, what to invent, what they grudgingly have to admit, even if mitigated. It's not a theory for him. It's the observed reality of the system.
And the psychologists believe they're getting raw data.
He criticizes them for believing they can get unshakable raw data directly from the source, the patient manipulation free. He calls them unsurpassed megalomaniacs for thinking they have this God-given right not to be completely fooled. He compares believing you can be totally honest with psychologists to going to church and expecting God to personally hand you all the answers. It's just a fundamental breakdown of trust in the whole process, from his viewpoint. He then uses psychopathy as a kind of case study, right, to show how unscientific and arbitrary diagnosis can be and how it can be used to discredit people.
Exactly. A prime example for him, he notes psychopathy, or sometimes sociopathy. It has this history of constantly changing definitions. From Cleckley's The Mask of Sanity in 1941
A classic text.
to Hare's Psychopathy Checklist, the PCLR, developed around 1980, revised in 1990. This shifting foundation itself, he argues, immediately undermines its claim to scientific validity.
And he goes into the checklist criteria.
He does, to illustrate how subjective they are. He mentions traits like glibness, superficial charm, grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying, betrayal, manipulative behavior, lack of remorse or guilt, callousness, lack of empathy.
Things that seem hard to measure objectively.
Precisely. Also things like parasitic lifestyle, irresponsibility, lack of realistic long-term goals, impulsivity, polytropic criminality, meaning diverse types of crime.
And his critique is that you can't really assess these reliably.
Exactly. He argues these subjective traits are impossible to capture, accurately in just a short interview. To really know, he jokes sarcastically, you'd need access to God's own surveillance camera footage, or maybe ask Santa Claus to watch someone's entire life. And crucially, if the subject lies, the test is meaningless. It's a knockout criterion for validity.
He finds the assessment time unbelievable, too.
Yeah, assessors spend maybe 2-4 hours with a patient, yet claim they can see through them better than long-term friends or family. He finds that incredible, especially thinking about serial offenders who fool their own families for years. He concludes firmly, every psychological test stands and falls with the honesty of the person being tested.
He also mentions this weird trend where psychopathic traits are sometimes seen as advantageous.
Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it? He cites Kevin Dutton's book, The Wisdom of Psychopaths, notes the author observed that Secret Service agents and serial killers are one and the same type of person, only that Secret Service agents are above the law.
That's a provocative comparison.
It is, and the buyer suggests that smarter psychopaths in secret services can basically commit crimes freely, operating above normal moral and legal rules. He also points out contradictory views among psychologists themselves. Some say a successful psychopath is an oxymoron. Others argue psychopathic traits are a recipe for life success.
Which raises that question again. If the criteria are so fluid, the interpretations so varied, even contradictory, what real validity can these labels have? Especially when they determine someone's freedom, their role in society. His critique really challenges the whole idea of psychology being truly scientific here.
Yeah, he highlights the internal inconsistencies, the potential for exploitation.
He also claims psychology itself is expanding its own market.
He does. He says psychology claims 30% of the population would show psychopathic traits, and at least a little psychopath would be in all of us. He sees this cynically as disease-mongering again, a tactic to get a bigger patient customer base, provide jobs for superfluous psychologists. He calls it a disgusting system, parasitic, spreading like cancer, exploiting public funds. Because nothing can be definitively proven or disproven, he argues. It just opens the door to abuse. Okay, but then he takes this really unexpected turn. He finds something he considers the ultimate absurdity in diagnoses.
Right, this is where it gets memorable. He stumbled upon, as he puts it, a truly funny but completely serious diagnosis in the ICD-10 handbook.
Which was?
Somatoform autonomic dysfunction with the psychogenic form of flatulence.
Wait, so psychogenic flatulence?
Yes. Specifically related to the lower digestive system, using terms like psychogenic irritable colon, psychogenic flatulence.
So, fruiting as a mental illness.
That's exactly his takeaway. Psychologists, in their almost infinite wisdom, have officially concluded after long deliberation that fruiting can be a mental illness.
Yeah.
And critically, it's a psychologist, not a gastroenterologist, who makes this determination.
How does he explain that?
He argues that when medical doctors can't find a clear physical cause for something, a psychologist gets called in so the doctor doesn't look incompetent. His cynical conclusion. If a doctor finds no cause, it must be the mind.
And he sees this as psychology overreaching its bounds.
Completely. He notes how psychologists' jurisdiction seems to have wandered from the head further down over pretty much all organs. Cites heart neurosis, the recently invented broken heart syndrome. He claims they ignore obvious physical factors like gut microbiome, food intolerances, allergies, diet, and just jump to a psychological cause. Flatulence, he states, is basically normal and completely natural.
What's the crux of his argument against this diagnosis?
That it's completely impossible to causally attribute a fort to a mental illness and to prove the cause-effect with facts evidence. He equates it to the church failing to prove God exists, an unprovable assertion presented as science, and it really prompts that question. What does it mean for a scientific discipline when it starts categorizing such broad human experiences, even involuntary bodily functions, as potentially pathological? He uses this extreme example to hammer home what he sees as psychology's ultimate lack of empirical basis, its massive overreach.
And then he gets sarcastic about how you'd even diagnose this.
Oh, extremely sarcastic. Detailed questions, not for answers, but just to show the absurdity. He wonders, when does a fret count as crazy? How would a psychologist sniff out the fret? Maybe in finest dog-like manner, or even the fist fart technique, followed by sniffing the hand.
He's really running with it.
Totally. He speculates about a scoring system for insane frets, whether psychofrets are worse for the climate, the potential length of institutionalization for a psychofretter. He even considers pleading psychological incapacity for a murderer, blaming it on a sudden, uncontrollable psychofret during the crime.
And he has a tip for people.
Yes, his everyday tip for psychofurters: always deny being the source and blame others. Be the first to smell it, publicly accuse someone else. He says this is a tactic he learned within the system, and he advises you, the listener, to follow it. Not because of the possible social ostracization, but because one could accuse you of a mental illness. It's dark humor, but with a very sharp point about the perceived stakes of diagnosis in his world.
So, given this deep systemic skepticism about diagnosis in general, it's really no surprise he rejects his own diagnoses.
Not at all. He attributes them to unscientific, ineffective, defaming remote diagnosis. Why? Because he completely refused any cooperation with the psychologists and assessors.
He wouldn't engage with them.
Wouldn't engage at all. He claims the outcome, the diagnosis, was politically motivated from the start. He says he knew he'd always be accused of paranoid schizophrenia, persecutory delusions, and megalomania, regardless of whether he cooperated or not.
So his non-cooperation was strategic.
He argues it makes the whole thing obvious and quite clear for everyone the diagnosis and the assessment are a complete farce. He mockingly asks if they have superpowers or telepathic powers to diagnose him remotely, with no interaction, no history.
Where did they get their information then, according to him?
Well, since he has no documented psychiatric history before this and didn't cooperate inside what he calls the black site, he asks, what's the source of the almost infinite wisdom concerning my psyche? His answer is blunt. Lies, defamation, slander, and misrepresentation of legal facts.
So not medical observation, but political ammunition.
That's exactly how he sees it. He views the diagnoses as a propagandistic trick designed to allow the evil ones, the alleged deep state, to prepare their grab for world power undetected, and specifically to disqualify me as the bearer of the contract, understandably for everyone.
That contract again, the world succession deed.
Yes, and it really raises that question. What happens when a powerful system, as he describes it, labels someone crazy specifically to discredit them, to stop them from taking on a perceived legal or political role? His perspective offers this chilling insight into the alleged weaponization of mental health diagnoses for geopolitical aims.
And the core goal, he says, is public perception.
To make him appear crazy in public, especially for some future day X. To disqualify him as a competitor for the leadership role in that deed. No one can seriously want a dangerous madman as king, he asserts. This ensures, he believes, that all solidarity and support is taken from me because no one supports a madman with his crazy theories. It's calculated isolation, in his view. Okay, let's break down the specific diagnoses he rejects. First, paranoid schizophrenia.
Right. How does he describe that illness itself?
He describes sufferers as completely insane and crazy of the worst and most dangerous kind, lacking control, unpredictable, prone to suddenly snap. And interestingly, he agrees that people who genuinely suffer from this do belong in penal psychiatry and must, of course, be locked away for life, which highlights his belief that the real condition is serious but distinct from his own alleged misdiagnosis.
And he contrasts that with the official criteria.
Yes. He references the ICD-10 criteria for paranoid schizophrenia to show the mismatch with his experience. Things like thought echo, thought insertion, thought withdrawal, or thought broadcasting, delusions of control, influence, or passivity, hearing commentary or dialogic voices.
Things he says he never experienced.
Never. Also, persistent culturally inappropriate, bizarre, and completely unrealistic delusions like controlling the weather, communicating with aliens, persistent hallucinations, neologisms, thought blocking, catatonic symptoms, negative symptoms like apathy or reduced speech.
And his rejection.
Absolute and emphatic. Absolutely nothing applies to me, he states. Having never imagined anything, lived out a delusion, heard voices, or hallucinated, he tells the story about a caregiver on Station 10B who apparently praised him. Under forced medication, you have improved. You don't hear voices anymore. How did he react to that?
He dismisses the caregiver as a moron. States he never heard voices, so how could the caregiver possibly know if they stopped, especially since he wasn't cooperating? He expresses this profound contempt for the staff generally, says conversations with them are worse than with other patients because staff must always elevate themselves above you, point out how crazy you supposedly are, and additionally patronize and discipline. You just have to hate them to the core. That animosity really underscores his belief in the system's intent to demean and control him. Okay, next diagnosis. Megalomania, or Grossenwahn.
Right. He argues a delusion is when you sit in your little room and imagine something. But he asserts he refers to a real existing contract, that world succession deed again. making it, in his view, a purely legal question and not a psychological one. His claims are based on documents, he insists, not internal fantasy.
What about the titles he uses? Like King of Kreuzberg?
He says any titles are used merely as a means of defense against hostilities from Germany, especially in what he calls those highly criminal German courts, for protection through state immunity, CD status, etc.
So a legal shield, not a personal belief.
That's his claim. He says, I don't give a shit about titles, they are totally irrelevant to me. He argues that publishing his information exposing these alleged deep state plans isn't megalomania, it's courageous, because it exposes the despicable Secret Service plan to achieve world domination and the treacherous megalomaniacal quest for world power by Germany and its allies striving for an NWO.
He also points out a technical issue with the diagnoses.
Yes, a contradiction within the ICD-10 framework itself, he claims. Megalomania, as part of persistent delusional disorders, is in contradiction to paranoid schizophrenia and is an exclusion criterion, meaning you can have either, but not both diagnosed at the same time, according to his reading.
Then there's persecutory delusions for Verfolgungswahn. That must hit close to home for him, given his accounts.
Oh, absolutely. ICD-10 describes it as a delusional belief of being surrounded by enemies, persecuted, and harmed. The buyer calls this diagnosis the absolute height of audacity. He claims the Secret Service is using its actual obvious persecution, the press attacks, the court cases, the Zersetzung tactics, all of it, and shockingly, framing this real persecution as just a delusion.
That's quite the inversion.
He uses this powerful analogy, like a school bully hitting a kid with their own hand and asking, why are you hitting yourself? That, for him, perfectly captures the perverse logic. All his alleged experience is losing his apartment 56 times in 6 years due to Zersetzung, the approx, 450 press articles inciting the public, over 900 files of massive judicial persecution, most of which he says were highly criminal and broke German law. All of that, according to the diagnosis, is just imagined or not considered persecution.
How does he react to that implication?
Sarcastically. He says if this isn't real political persecution, then he'd immediately sign up for voluntary ice pick windshield wiper lobotomy. He suggests he must be living in a complete fantasy world. It just underscores this massive chasm between his perceived reality and the official narrative. And then there's maybe the most unusual diagnosis, the claim he infected his mother with delusional ideas.
Yeah, that one sounds strange.
He dismisses it as completely idiotic, questions the mechanism airborne, contact, telepathy. Demonology is simply not my field, he mocks.
Did he find a corresponding diagnosis for that?
He did. An ICD-10 induced delusional disorder, sometimes called folie à deux. It describes a shared delusion between two closely bonded, isolated individuals. One has a psychotic disorder, the other's delusions are induced and supposedly disappear upon separation.
But he argues that doesn't fit his case.
Exactly. He asserts that even after over 10 years without visits, years of a phone ban, a long separation, his mother has not lost the delusion induced by me and is, as always, completely sane and not crazy. This, he argues, directly contradicts the criteria for induced delusional disorder.
He broadens the application of this idea too, doesn't he?
Provocatively, yes. Suggests it could apply to entire peoples, like Hitler inducing a delusional disorder in the German population. He even applies it to psychologists themselves, infecting each other with delusional disorders during their studies, perpetuating a shared, baseless reality.
It certainly raises questions about psychological contagion and how that label could be used, not just against an individual, but their whole support network, anyone who shares their views. He clearly sees it as a calculated tactic to discredit his family and their shared story.
Absolutely. He claims this diagnosis makes him officially the craziest and most dangerous in penal psychiatry. Why? Because he's contagiously mentally ill. He expresses this dark, almost humorous fear of infecting unsuspecting pedestrians, or worse, the entire populace with my madness mass delusions for everyone. This framing, he believes, makes it impossible to ever release him, let alone consider him for power. It portrays him as a kind of mental public health threat, cementing his indefinite incarceration.
But there's a moment of dark humor he shares, too. Another diagnosis.
Yes, a rare one, offered by a fellow patient. He recounts this patient, interested in unusual psychological ailments, diagnosed him with generalized cheerfulness disorder, GHKS. Apparently, even the station management asked him, why do you always have a good mood and joke?
Generalized cheerfulness disorder. What are the symptoms?
He lists them, referencing an ICD-10Q version 2B, likely playfully. Psychological symptoms: balanced mood even in stress, feeling comforted without external comfort, inappropriate trust despite the abyss of human existence, behavioral, inappropriate composure in sad events, lack of tension under daily stress, noticeable lack of optimistic belief in progress, physical, frequent, sometimes barely visible smiling.
And does he think this applies to him?
Mostly, yes. He says all symptoms apply except slowed motor skills and lack of optimistic belief in progress, which he rejects. He mentions his mother called him a sunshine, and he's notorious for always being in a good mood come what may.
How does he interpret that diagnosis?
Not as an illness, but as a sign of being psychologically very resilient. He finds it simply goes too far to define that as a mental illness. For me, this is a very good trait and largely defines my personality. While it's presented lightly, it still powerfully reinforces his core critique. Psychology's perceived tendency to pathologize normal, even positive human traits. So bringing it all together, what does the buyer see as the grand purpose behind all this? The diagnoses, the incarceration in this black site Berlin.
He's very clear about the ultimate endgame, as he sees it.
Unequivocally, he states, with my diagnosis of being crazy, I am definitely out as a future head of state as originally stated in the contract, referring, of course, to the World Succession Deed 1400.
That's the core political motive he alleges.
Yes. The true reason for declaring him crazy, he claims, is to force him on a future day X to relinquish the rights again, because the people can never, ever accept a madman as king. It also serves as an additional gift to the evil ones by stripping him of any solidarity and support, because nobody supports a madman with his crazy theories. He states, neither press, nor people, nor politicians as a madman, you are simply scum and have no supporters. Complete isolation as a deliberate political outcome.
And this isolation facilitates what larger plan?
It allows the evil ones, the alleged deep state, to undisturbed pursue their plan for the establishment of an NWO, a new world order. Furthermore, his mother, also holding a key position in his narrative, able to represent him, she also had to be declared crazy.
And that infection diagnosis plays a key role there.
Crucially, it creates a narrative, he says, that he comes from a whole dynasty of madmen, a long line of madmen, extremely bad DNA inherited madness. This makes him, he claims, the most dangerous in penal psychiatry because he's contagiously mentally ill. A label cementing his permanent removal from influence. It brings us right back to his central claim about conspiracy facts. His entire experience isn't medical, in his view. It's a sophisticated political maneuver to neutralize him as a threat to a global agenda.
Yet, despite this incredibly bleak situation he describes, he looks to the future with surprising optimism.
It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? He juxtaposes his scathing critique of current psychology with the immense potential he sees in advanced science. He dismisses human intelligence, especially that of the intelligence-free psychologists, as provenly incapable of truly understanding the brain. He claims the assembled so-called knowledge of psychology since the beginning of time is 100% based on unproven theories and conjecturous speculations. Fundamentally unproven, he argues.
And he emphasizes the brain's complexity.
Massively. The most complex system in our known visible universe. Approx. 100 billion nerve cells and unimaginably huge quadrillion synaptic connections. Current medication, he stresses, just shoots uncontrollably at the entire brain system. Can't account for individual quirks. Results only in dampening, sedating at best, maybe reinforcing symptoms at worst, and always, he emphasizes, with terrible side effects. It's his assessment of primitive tools for an infinitely complex system.
So where does he see hope?
In future technology. For truly understanding and treating mental illness. Things like vastly improved imaging, advanced MRI, McGee giving better insights, generating huge amounts of data that will need AI for analysis. Quantum computing, too.
Essential, he believes, to simulate the human brain, offering unimaginable processing power. He gives the example. 4,500, 5,000 qubits could potentially process more operations per second than atoms in the visible universe. He even mentions a tech company aiming for a 10 million qubit quantum computer soon, seeing that as a real step forward.
And AI plays a huge role in this vision.
Key. AI and AGI, artificial general intelligence, part of cognitive science, viewing the brain as a biological computer. An AGI with an IQ of 100,000 points upwards, capable of Nobel Prize-worthy inventions every minute, could, he imagines, solve all pressing problems of humanity, including psychological illnesses. He points to the new discipline of neuroscience-inspired AI, neuro-KI, developing AI inspired by biological brains for a deep, mechanistic understanding of mind and brain. That fusion, he thinks, is where breakthroughs will happen.
Leading to what kind of treatments?
Truly Personalized medicine for the uniquely individual patient, a pill for only this one patient and only this specific ailment. He's convinced this revolutionary scientific development will simply make psychology as we know it today obsolete. The end of psychology as we know it.
This means the end of speculation and the beginning of knowledge, he declares. A fundamental shift from pseudoscience, as he sees it, to verifiable empirical understanding. He even foresees AI taking over as soul comforter or life coach. Cites studies showing people are more open and honest with virtual avatar psychologist AIs because they don't feel judged. His motto, so AI first.
It's truly fascinating, that extreme optimism for future tech right alongside his profound disdain for current psychology. It really poses this huge question for all of us. If our understanding of the brain does evolve to that point, mechanistic, personalized, will our current concepts of sanity and madness even hold any meaning anymore? Will the whole foundation of how we define and treat mental distress be completely transformed, making today's debates, well, obsolete?
It's a mind-bending thought. But circling back to the present, to his current reality in penal psychiatry, the buyer reiterates his strong negative view on the medications he's subjected to.
Right, the psychopharmaceuticals.
He lists the main categories he knows: neuroleptics, psycholeptics, psychosedatives, tranquilizers, thymoleptics, psychotonics, psychedelics, hypnotics.
And his conclusion on them.
Firm, based on his experience and observation. All of them only work conditionally or in phases for the insane. A real, lasting cure through medication is impossible and has never happened. He maintains the only guaranteed effect are the sometimes terrible side effects, and that they are always unbearable. Just a picture of constant suffering without genuine therapeutic gain in his account. Well, this deep dive has presented us with a truly extraordinary and frankly deeply challenging account. The buyer's journey through penal psychiatry, what he insists on calling a black site Berlin, his scathing critiques of psychological diagnosis, his absolute conviction that his situation is part of this larger global conspiracy of facts. It leaves us with an immense amount to consider.
Indeed. His narrative really compels you, doesn't it? To think critically about authority, how truth gets constructed and then broadcast, and the profound, sometimes terrifying power embedded in the very definitions of mental health and illness. It really makes you wonder about the specific power structures dictating those definitions, and how someone's personal reality, their agency, can be so thoroughly reframed and suppressed by a system they perceive as hostile.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? If, as the buyer claims, the human mind really is the most complex system in the known universe, and if our current ways of understanding and diagnosing it are, as he so vehemently asserts, so deeply flawed, so potentially weaponized, what truly constitutes sanity in our world? And maybe more importantly, who ultimately holds the power to decide?
A heavy question to end on.
It is. Join us next time on The Deep Dive for another exploration into the facts, the fascinating, and the truly thought-provoking.